do a little, very simple intro. But I ended up working for 15 nuns outside of working for Apple, doing their support. So I've got great little stories supporting them at their convent. It's such a random thing. But
supporting nuns.
Yeah, literally supporting tech support for nuns. And the greatest thing, one of the greatest things I ever saw there was they were leaving and they were getting rid of a load of stuff, and they had this huge kind of pyre, like from a 70s Hammer film, and they were this huge pile of stuff outside, and they'd actually made a fireproof habit to go over a habit. And it's the greatest thing. I wish I had a photo of it. It would have been fantastic to show people.
Oh my God.
But yeah, it's one of those things, you have memories from productions or life, and I just wish, like the floor in my house, the teak flooring is from the convent, because they wanted to throw things away, and I said, is it, getting rid of everything? And they said, yeah, would you like anything? I said, yeah, the floor. And because it's from the 30s in the Northwest.
Oh wow!
So yeah, there's some random German furniture from the convent here as well. So it's followed me here.
How amazing!
Yeah.
And were you were physically working in the convent?
Yeah, I was invited in as some random guy. It's because there was a level of trust, and it seems like some sort of joke, or a scene in a film where. The 5 nuns came in. They arrived in a small red car, and they came into the store, and they came straight to me because I was really supportive and friendly and helpful. But they were really tech savvy, knew what they wanted. And then after that, after I left Apple, they said, "Would you do this privately?" I said, "Yeah, £20 an hour or whatever." And then they would serve me food at lunchtime, and I would be sitting with all the nuns. It's it's one of those great memories I have of retail and work and everything.
That's fascinating. Oh, well, it sounds like a good experience.
Oh yeah, a great experience. Yeah, and whenever I tell anyone like yourself, a filmmaker, TV producer, and it sounds so random, but it's a nice kind of icebreaker, and it kind of it kind of feeds into my fascination of storytelling and filmmaking, and there's little gems throughout your life or people you work with that you kind of develop into a story. And there's going to be some sort of horror based short, I think, at the convent they've moved to in Leicester. I'm kind of trying to speak to them about making something there, which would be incredible, because better than I, location costs and everything skyrocket as soon as you talk about TV or film. But yeah, just that's our little cold open for everyone talking about nuns and flora and all sorts. But Vincenzo Natali, thank you so much for being on the Creative Connection podcast. That's the spiel, or the intro. But we're talking to filmmakers, producers, photographers, painters, all sorts of creatives. We're not kind of just about filmmaking. It's kind of whole plethora of creatives. But how are you doing at the moment? What are you kind of working on?
Do you use the video?
Oh, so yeah, we use the video. So we split screen it on YouTube, and it's side by side. But the great thing with Squadcast is it records 1080p of both ends, and then it records the audio separately, so you can mix it really well. And I've got an audio engineer friend who mixes everything for me. So yeah. But yeah,
this is going to work for you. I share the space, so you may hear a little stuff in the background.
That's fine. I've got my little dog asleep just behind me, so so she might randomly bark at someone outside. So yeah. So how are things?
All right.
Kind of what I wanted to get started with was how did you start? Where did your love for film and science fiction and horror kind of begin? Was it a friend or a brother or sister that introduced you to film?
No, not at all. No, I don't know where it began. Somewhere in the womb. I think it started at a genetic level, actually.
Yeah.
And I say that half seriously, but I've noticed in my son, with whom I've made no effort to introduce him to that stuff, he's drawn to it. So I think there might be a gene for it. Yeah, I think you're right. I think you see someone like a David Cronenberg or John Carpenter, and it's kind of almost beyond.
it started extremely early for those filmmakers. And where did your taste for creating and being creative yourself, where did that kind of start?
Again, at a very early age, I've drawn as long as I can remember. I mean, like a lot of kids do, but I was quite serious about it. And in my earlier years, I aspired to be a comic book artist. That was really my first love, were comic books. And so having now finally made one myself, it's kind of like a long time coming, like 50 years in the making.
Yeah.
But that's really where it started for me.
And because obviously, apart from your great body of work, storyboarding and drawing is a huge thing for yourself. And is that where you started kind of in the industry as well? Was storyboarding before you kind of had a crack at short films and then features?
I started making films at around the age of 11. I mean, that's a very generous description of what I was doing, but I had a Super 8 camera, and with my friends, we would do things. And then by the time we got to high school, it got quite serious. And, by the time I graduated from high school, there was no question in my mind that I wanted to make movies, and I went directly into film school. But I was very lucky because I could draw, and at a certain point, just to make a living, I started doing storyboards for commercials and movies and for kids animation on TV. And I did that fairly intensely for about 5 years. And it was a really great situation because I would work there's an animation studio here in Toronto called Nelvana, and I would work half the year doing boards, and then they would seasonally lay off everybody for half the year. So then I would go on unemployment insurance, and I would take the money that I had earned doing storyboards, and I'd make a film.
Oh, okay.
A 16 millimeter film. And so, boards were the sort of first professional work I did in the film industry, but they were really my entree into getting my own more professional looking shorts made and eventually features.
Was it Elvated? Would you consider your last serious short before Cube?
Yes, Elvated. I mean, Elvated was really my first professional film work, I would say. Even though it was done in film school, it was done at the Canadian Film Centre, which is kind of an advanced film institute modeled after the American Film Institute. So everyone who works there works on these films is a professional, even though they're not being paid. And so that was the first. It's the only short film of mine that I want to show to anyone. Anything before that was a little more raw.
Yeah. M. Night Shyamalan, he's a bit more of the. I'll actually show what I did before I did something a little bit more serious. So if you look at some of his kind of earlier DVDs and Blu-rays, he's actually released a series of his early stuff, and some of it's a bit hinky, but you can see where his talent was, and you can kind of see your style in Elvated before Cube, with the use of close-ups and the importance of isolation. And obviously it was the same cinematographer for Elvated for Cube, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, Elvated grew out of Cube because I had the script for Cube. I had it for years, and at that point I just thought this is never going to get made. So when I had the opportunity to do the short film at the Film Center, I did kind of a mini Cube, which was Elvated.
Yeah.
And then ironically, because of that film, suddenly everybody understood what Cube was going to be, and that's how Cube got made.
Yeah, that's you see, like.
Although it was not my intention, I wasn't that smart,
Yeah, because there's a lot of people that kind of think, I'll make something like this, like a proof of concept, then it'll be reality. And with like the Coen brothers, they made I think it was a trailer for Blood Simple, and that's how they got financing for Blood Simple. Was it high school that you met David Hewlett before you started working with him?
So David there was a group of us, and principally it was myself and Andre Bajelic, who I wrote Cube with, and we would make a short film, like a fairly serious short film every summer. And David was the thespian at my school. Like he was, actually a good actor. Prior to working with him, we would just use ourselves, and we were not good actors. But David was the real thing. And so we invited him to join us, and it kind of never stopped. And here we are in our 50s, and we're still doing it.
He has that amazing. Might sound strange, but he has that amazing kind of desperation on his face that sells so well. And with Elvated, obviously, as soon as he gets in the film, but it feels a little bit surreal that I'm speaking to you, because I spoke to Joe Alves, the production designer of Jaws, and that was speaking about Escape from New York and creating the shark for Jaws, and with yourself there, I've got a very good friend of mine. He's moved to Australia now, and we were huge fans of Cypher and Cube, and we were like, that's how you get started. That's how we felt back then, because we were very good friends in 98, 99, and obviously that was a year or two after Cube came out. So how did the kind of finances and how did that production get started on Cube?
Well, it's pretty much what I was saying. So my lucky break was going to the Canadian Film Centre. Up until that point, everything I had done was self-financed, done on my own. Some of my films had played in festivals and on TV a little bit, but I really hadn't been given any kind of official stamp of approval. And the Film Centre, first of all, there was what they called the residency program, where I did a lot of workshops and so on. And then as a director resident, you could apply to make a short film, and then you could apply to make a feature film. So I'm sure they were sick of me. Like, I'm sure they were delighted when I finally left, because I did everything. I was very, very fortunate. I made the short film, and then, as I say, that triggered the feature film, because I had, of course, submitted Cube to them, and they initially said no. But then I think the confluence of seeing Elvated, plus I think they had a space available, and they needed to get a movie going, and mine was ready, made that movie happen. And I don't know that it would have happened any other way, because at that time there wasn't really a template for like a hermetic kind of thriller like that that's more or less one location. I know it seems strange now because there's just a proliferation of them, but in those days there really wasn't. So a lot of people would read Cube and say, well, is this a short film? Like, they didn't trust that it could be a feature. And so I think it really just was because I was in that very unique place, being at the Film Center, being like a film school, that I could do that. And then I could do it with tremendous creative freedom, because, they are a learning institution. They're not about trying to make movies that make a lot of money. And at any other time we had a nibble from somebody who was interested in Cube, they always wanted to go in and tinker with the script in ways that we thought weren't smart. So I was just very lucky. That's how that happened, and then actually things got harder after that, ironically, for me. It was a weird, my journey, everyone has their own journey in this business, but mine was making that film, and it actually did fairly well. It went to Sundance. It got sold around the world. It, made money. But the tough one for me was my second film, because I had a second film I wanted to make, but nobody wanted to make it, and that was Splice, which I eventually made about a decade later. But I think that would be one of the things I would impart to young filmmakers and that I'm still learning, trying to learn, is that you need to sow many seeds. And I think that I struggled a bit after my first film, because I thought that was the hill that I was going to have to climb, and after that it would get comparatively easier. But it didn't. It was just as hard getting the second one, and just as hard getting the third, and so on and so on. And kind of every time you do this, you have to reinvent the wheel. So I've learned that you have to protect yourself, because there's you're very lucky when a movie gets made. A lot of the planets have to align. A lot of things have to come together. So you need to work on many, many things at the same time. which is a kind of skill. I don't think it comes naturally to most creative people. I think the natural thing to do is to work on one thing at a time. But my experience is that no, it's too dangerous. You could spend years and years working on something, and something could happen. Someone could make a movie that's similar, or any number of things could happen that could prevent that film from happening, and then you're just kind of left with nothing.
Yeah, so you're constantly spinning plates.
You really have to be. But what I'm learning, I think, is that there's a positive side to that, which is when you have like all of these ideas, all these plates spinning, it's almost more like a dynamo. That kind of creative energy feeds in from one project into the other, and then you become less precious about them. So I actually think it's hard to do, and it takes time to kind of get this momentum going. But once you do, it's actually quite exhilarating, and I think it helps the projects. But this is something that's taken me a very long time to learn how to do. So if I was speaking to my younger self, if I was speaking to any younger filmmakers out there, I would say my advice would be start that early on. Don't wait, because you'd be surprised. Once films take forever to actually happen, but when they do happen, everything happens too fast.
Yeah. And then the experience.
All of a sudden you're in production, you're like, no, I need more time.
Yeah, more time.
Even if it took you years and years to get there. And then when the film's out and it actually manages to do well, then you've got to have your next thing ready, to capitalize on that brief moment when you have people's attention and they have a desire to work with you.
Yeah, that's a great way to kind of describe that to people, because if you've got something great going, if you just kind of catch the end of it, or it's like how when Pixar had a great series of releases, like every film was coming out and being $500-600 million, you would see their release pattern kind of they have this kind of overlap. But I guess that when you're in production yourself or creating ideas and creating shorts, having that overlap helps you develop your skills, and you're not waiting around. So if you do have success, you have to kind of jump on it. And just taking it back to, I have to take it back to Cube, obviously, as I will. But how did you kind of cast that? Because you got some great, Nicola de Boer's fantastic, Morris is amazing, obviously David as well. So was that something from the schooling, or how did you kind of cast that film?
Well, again, we were very fortunate. So we were effectively making a student film. We were quote unquote film students, but actually the way the program was structured was we were working with professional actors, with unionized crew, very, very experienced people. So we had at our disposal, they had to be Canadian, and they ideally had to be local, so you wouldn't have to travel them. But I'm based in Toronto. The program was based in Toronto, so there's actually quite a healthy talent pool here. So we just pulled from the talent pool, and Andre and I had written one part for David Hewlett, and we'd also written a part for Andrew Miller, who's an actor friend of ours, and then the rest we just cast in a traditional casting process and picked who we thought were the best people. And we got really great actors. Because what I've always curious about, and when you have a film like that, you think that what other rooms could look like, the other parts of the cube itself. Was there much that you kind of threw to the wayside in terms of ideas of what the traps or what the rooms would do, or was it like you'd already kind of plotted out in the flowchart what the rooms were going to be like? Well, one of the things that attracted me to the idea of making a movie like Cube was that I could do it in this very controlled way. So it's one set, it's all interiors, it's in a studio, we don't have to worry about weather. There are 6 characters, so it's an ensemble, but it's not a big ensemble. In that way, I felt like I could focus my limited resources on just getting a few things right, and also I'd be in this very controlled situation. That notion completely blew up at the end of the first day of shooting, because while it was one set, it was a very complex set technically to construct and engineer, and there really hadn't been the time to test everything. And so the doors in the set didn't work. Like you really physically could hardly open them. And the whole movie is about people opening and closing doors and walking through doors. And I was going to shoot. I had the kind of the rare situation where, because of the unique nature of the film, I could potentially shoot it in script order, which is normally not how things are done in movies. Usually you have to do everything out of order just because of logistical necessity. But in this case, I could actually have started with scene 1 and go right to the end of the movie, which would be great for the actors and for me and everyone to stay in continuity. But that notion immediately was thrown out the window. And the second day, we had to jump to the middle of the movie, to the only sequence that didn't have doors opening and closing all the time, which is a massive dialogue scene that David had to memorize overnight, like pages and reams of dialogue. Yeah. It's a miracle that he did it and then delivered an amazing performance. But that was my notion, and so everything, to correctly answer your question, everything was meticulously planned. And of course, being a storyboard artist, like I drew everything. But there was a limit to what we could afford. So there were things that I wanted in the movie that we really couldn't do, and we were very lucky to actually manage to get what we did in there. There were things I had. Some interesting notions that weren't fully realized. No, it's fine.
It's like as soon as the film opens, someone's kind of, it's cheese wire and they're just taken apart, and it has that visceral quality that's lost in a lot of science fiction now. Because the film has a really quite a big influence across a lot of shows and a lot of films like Saw, Escape Room, and that because of the nature of the physical effects, and even though it was a higher end, what you could in the UK probably class as a higher end short film, a lot of that is lost now in obviously CG and non-practical, but it has a huge influence on TV and horror especially. And where did that kind of passion for science fiction and horror come from for yourself? Where did that kind of start? And because it seems to be like a through line through your career.
Yeah, well, I really don't have a desire to make anything but science fiction, horror, or fantasy films. And I really attribute that partly to the fact that my life is so dull. Like I would never commit my life to film. That would be awful. That would be incredibly boring. But my internal life, I think, is a little bit interesting. I think where my imagination takes me is interesting. And invariably, that is always a metaphor for real life. I think that the greatest horror films are almost always metaphorical. And in being an aficionado of those genres, it's important to me to try to do things that are new. So not just to imitate something that came before, because as a filmmaker, I want what I want as an audience. I want to be taken somewhere new. And not to say that I don't owe massive debt to many, many filmmakers and artists and so on, but I aspire to mutate the genre. I aspire to take the genre somewhere that I haven't really seen it go before. And I knew with Cube that I had stumbled on a fabulous idea. I mean, I know my science fiction horror well enough to know that was a really original idea. And I almost feel like I can't take credit for it. I always say that writing Cube with Andre and then later Graham Manson was more like archaeology than it was writing. It felt like the Cube was this thing buried under the sands of time, and we were digging around it and discovering it, like as if it already existed. And
well, that's it. Like you're saying,
I knew it was special.
That's it. It's exactly that. It's very hard to find something original and or create something original, and it's an amount. These things like your film Splice. It's the bringing together of different ideas and making it kind of gel well in an original context as well. Like one of the most original horror films I've seen recently is Talk to Me. Did you manage to see that?
I haven't seen it yet. I want to.
You got the Raka Raka brothers. They're originally kind of YouTubers that ended up producing this horror feature, and it has this Australian edge to it as well, and it feels very, very grounded. It's a really nice idea, so I'd highly recommend watching that. And like you say,
I will 100% watch that very soon.
Yeah, it's please let me know what you think of it as well. But yeah, it's interesting to hear that Q wasn't like the door that opened everything for you. It was like a continuous slog from that, and you hear that from actors as well that they get a small part in something and think, oh, it's going to open up everything to me, and then it's a constant battle. And it's interesting to see that when you've gone on to something like the newest, one of your newest works, Peripheral. Did that stem from working on Westworld and working with was it one of the writers that helped develop Peripheral? Is that right?
Yeah, what happened was it goes back to my failed attempt to make a movie out of Neuromancer. So for years, I worked on The Neuromancer, which is William Gibson's first novel and a seminal science fiction novel, and I had somehow managed to acquire the rights and wrote a script that I confess I was very happy with, but it was just I think too big and too dark to get made, too adult, and so it never happened. But I was very fortunate to have made a connection with Mr. Gibson, and kind of we remained in contact. And when he wrote this book, The Peripheral, he sent it to me, and I read it, and I thought, this will never be a movie because it's so complex.
Yeah,
like Neuromancer is very dense, famously difficult book to adapt. This is infinitely more dense and complex, but fascinating. And it was actually my producing partner, Steve Hoban, who said, well, what about a TV series? And I coincidentally happened to be working on my first episode of Westworld at the time, and got to know Jonah Nolan and Lisa Joy, who ran that program. And I thought maybe they'd like it. And it turns out they did. And within 24 hours of me giving the book, they had read it and said, we'd like this to be our next thing, which was insane.
Wow.
I've never had that happen, and I'm sure
that sounds
that'll
like
never happen again.
Yeah,
and
for that to happen so quickly, that must have been like, wow, that's just... And did they carry that enthusiasm? Were you presenting it as the writer or producer of the show? Were you attached directly to that project?
Yeah, and they're really cool. Like, they're lovely people. They're immediately very supportive. And it then took 7 years before the series was actually finished. But they responded immediately, and I didn't think I had it within me to write it. A lot of it takes place in Appalachia and just like a part of America I don't know. So oddly enough, the British side of it, I think I would have been okay writing, but Appalachia, I didn't think I could, and I've never done TV. So anyway, they brought on an excellent writer, Scott Smith, who's famous for having written The Simple Plan, and over a number of years, we developed the pilot and the seasonal arc, and eventually Amazon picked it up, and there were bumps along the road, but it did happen in a very linear fashion, which I'm not accustomed to. And it was very well made and produced, and I had a great time doing it. And I think Mr. Gibson was happy with it, so it was a great experience. But it could never have happened if not for Jonah and Lisa.
Absolutely,
I left to my own devices, it would not have happened. It was because of them.
Yeah, because a weight that a name, or not just a name, but what they've produced recently, kind of, especially when it's something with Westworld and the shows he produced before, it carries a lot of weight. Or like, yeah, we'll listen to you, and that must have been pretty exciting to have them behind you to help you kind of get that realized.
Yeah, it was really extraordinary. It always comes down to that. It's always an alignment of the planets, and it can never be planned. These things just kind of... I'm very fatalistic in a way. I feel like, I don't want to sound corny or new agey, but I do think to a certain degree these things are almost destined to be, or not to be. But it does take that kind of random confluence of things to get something like that made. And I think, again, I feel enormously lucky.
What's your because of your kind of TV credits and the work you have with recurring actors, what's your kind of process for casting? Because with Splice, obviously with Sarah and Adrian, you got two fantastic. Sarah Polly, who's kind of she gets almost being an icon of horror now with Dawn of the Dead remake with which was fantastic, and her performance was great in that. What's your kind of process for casting after kind of at the beginning of your career and round about now? Because obviously with a show it's much different because a lot of the cast are already in place. So what's your kind of, how hands-on are you, and what stage do you kind of start looking at the actors?
Well, casting is always the most frustrating part of the process because it's the part that you have the least amount of control. And even if you're Jonah and Lisa, like there's a lot of people between you and the talent, and you don't know if the material is getting to them or how it's being presented to them. There's an extreme amount of randomness in that process, I find. We're talking about like casting known actors. Yeah. If you're casting, bringing unknown actors or lesser known actors into a room and auditioning, that's another thing entirely, and that's a lot of fun because you start to see your words actually come to life, and different actors bring different things to it. It's a very exciting, wonderful process.
But yeah, we were talking about it's in obviously in some circumstances it's completely random, the casting, because there is kind of several layers to the onion before you kind of see anyone. What was that like on something like Cypher, for instance, with Jeremy Northam and Lucy Liu? Were they already attached? How did that kind of work out?
That actually was rather, I don't want to say easy, but when we went out with that script, which was written by a friend of mine, Brian King, people really responded to it. And I saw all kinds of actors and a lot of really great actors who wanted to be in it. And it was at Warner. It was with a company that was at Warner Brothers. So I think that helped. And as opposed to most of my films, which are, little indie movies, I think the heft of a, major studio behind us made us more appealing, possibly. But really, Brian and I just felt Jeremy was like the best actor. That's why we chose him. And then Lucy was suggested to us. I believe I met her once before we kind of mutually decided to do it together, but we immediately loved the idea of her for it, and she proved to be fantastic. So that was actually quite easy and simple and pleasurable.
Yeah, someone like Jeremy, I think that whenever I see him pop up in something, and when he's in, I think it's the first season of The Crown, and he's the kind of bumbling kind of prime minister in his role, and he's just phenomenal. He has this kind of real quality. Like when you worked on like American Gods, you've some of the kind of actors and performers across the shows you've worked on. It's like, does it become easier now, or is it just as difficult? Say when you come onto the set of Westworld and you've got the cast is phenomenal and production's phenomenal with HBO. Do you have to kind of warm up to those individuals and the crew, as opposed to, say, a feature film where you've already got actors and cast you've already worked with? How difficult is it to get into kind of the rhythm of directing with people that have already kind of worked together, or is it just easy and do you slot in?
I've had very good experiences working on TV, actually. Almost better than my own movies for some reason. But you are, as in TV, as a kind of journeyman director, you are playing substitute teacher to some degree, because you're correct, everybody on the set knows each other, all the actors know each other, and you're the variable, like you're the new piece that's being slotted in. I have consistently found both the crews and the cast, almost all the shows I've worked on, to be lovely and really engaged and professional and great to work with. And then for me to like have the opportunity to work with someone like Ed Harris or Hopkins.
He's the man. Like, I mean, if Avatar was being made in the 90s, I think he would have had he would have been the Quaritch character really easily. Like James Cameron would have gone, yeah, he's my Quaritch straight away. But kind of, he's obviously, you know, a renownedly intense actor. What was that like? Because I met him when he was doing a stage play. I think it was at the end of the first season in London. He was doing a play with his wife, and he was talking about how he loved working with Anthony Hopkins. So what was that like for you as a director, working with someone that's got such a career? Is it always new to you when you meet someone like that, kind of iconic, or work with them?
Yeah, I mean, that was a little surreal, because I mean, those actors are people that I grew up watching. You know, they're kind of part of my brain. Like, I've absorbed them so much through movies.
Yeah.
That I almost feel like I know them personally, as I guess a lot of people do with celebrities. But you know, you just go in there and do it. Like, at the end of the day, if it's Anthony Hopkins or David Hewlett, it's the same. It's not the same process, because everybody's different. I shouldn't say that, but you are basically just
David would love to hear that. David would love to hear that.
Yeah. Well, listen, a good actor is a good actor. Yeah. And there's, as a director, one of the most wonderful things opportunities you have is when you work with great actors, because it's just like magic. You just sit back and watch it happen. And usually I feel like the director just needs to get out of the way. I try to not impose myself. I try to be available. I try to be very clear in terms of what I'm intending to do. But I almost always defer to the actors. I listen to them. I find with good actors, if they have a suggestion, it's usually a great idea. And so I try to make myself very available to them. But when you're talking about people like that, it really is just a matter of like creating an environment that is comfortable for them, and then just letting them do their thing. And it's just a wonder to behold, and it makes everything pleasurable and easy. And all those people were lovely to work with. You know, like they're. What season is your episode? Your episodes of Westworld? What season is it? I did one episode in the first and one episode in the second.
Because I'm a huge fan of Westworld. I actually really enjoy Future World as the two original features.
Oh yeah.
And when you hear casting, and HBO or Max as it's called now, you hear casting and ideas. And as soon as I heard Ed Harris was going to be the Man in Black, I thought, that's a stroke of genius. That's an absolute stroke of genius. And because when those first stills were coming out and you see him in the hat and everything, like, yeah, I love Yul Brynner, but this is what I want, because I'm a huge fan of like The Abyss, and I heard rumors that there's actually a 4K print or 4K release of The Abyss coming out soon. So like yourself, growing up with that and growing up with someone like that and his earlier work, and you can see why it's really thrilling, because there's a level of trust, with someone like David. You've got that rapport with, you've built that relationship. But when you've got like true pros on set, it's kind of, it's a plate that you can just let spin, isn't it? Is the performances, and like you say, getting out of the way is half the job, I guess.
Yeah, that's where I can put my feet up. kind of relax a bit. Otherwise, like when I'm shooting a complicated scene, with extreme time pressure, that's when I'm sweating. But when you get a scene of, two or more great actors in a room talking to each other, then they're doing all the hard work. And it's a wonder to behold. It's very exciting. And the scripts are good. That's the other thing is I spent years in Hollywood reading what they call open directing assignments, but basically scripts that were written that were looking to attach directors. And, they were okay, generally speaking. And I was looking at fairly high-level stuff, I think. But they weren't great, to be honest.
Yeah.
Was my general reaction. When I started working in TV, the scripts started getting great. I started reading stuff that I thought was very, very well written. And I that also is a big part of it. When the words are good, too, and the right person says them, that's very exciting.
Yeah, because it must be having like even more avenues to create content. And one of the most difficult things, and I think you can appreciate this, that there was a joy to have walking around Blockbuster, or in the UK there was a rental place called Wisetime, especially in the northwest of England, that you could see those covers, see the features and choose what you want. And with it, it's so difficult to pick something now. You've got this kind of almost doom scrolling, not of Instagram, but of shows and content, and catching someone's attention. And the reason I mention that is I really enjoy In the Tall Grass, and when you've got someone like Patrick Wilson, he's one of those actors now that I can't separate him from horror, and obviously James Wan's a big reason for that. He must have been another collaborator that when you had that project, did you write that, or was it just a feature you directed?
I wrote it, yeah.
So what was that another kind of another process where the casting was already kind of set, or were you kind of involved in that?
No, actually, originally James Marsden was going to play that role, because I had met him on Westworld, and then James, who I love, took Sonic the Hedgehog. That was a much more
well. Actually, we laugh, but it's huge. It's huge. Phenomenal for what it's done. The two films, yeah.
No, it's huge. I know the guys who I really like. But so nothing against Sonic, but I did lose him. The grass lost out to Sonic the Hedgehog. But then I knew, this is weird, but I knew that Patrick Wilson had seen and liked Splice. And so I think I was sort of able to reach out to him using that as kind of a calling card. And he was incredible, And if you read the novella, which is an amazing piece of writing, the character is not as interesting as Patrick made it. The character is more like a kind of a less appealing version of Jack Torrance. But right. Patrick's such a handsome, charismatic guy that he kind of brought this element of glee and charisma to this character that made him appealing. And even though he's a completely repulsive human being, so I think we're and you need that guy. You need that kind of force at the center of a movie like that to ground it and to kind of give it its energy, or its fulcrum for its energy. And so it was really great having him, and he was, of course, terrific to work with.
I totally agree with what you're saying, and from your experience, it's great to hear that he's one of the actors that if I see he's involved, I'm like, yeah, okay, I'm in. I'm going to watch that, because he has this just this kind of, like you say, energy, and he has this charisma that's lost in many ways, and I think that he's kind of got this old school movie quality to him. Yeah. But yeah, in terms of horror, he's kind of up there now with what he's in,
and he's prepared to do things. Like I think sorry to interrupt you. But
No, no, go
in
ahead.
Tall Grass, like I know that there were actors that just were not going to touch that because the character does really, really awful things, and they don't want that character to rub off on them as a celebrity. But I think Patrick was brave to do that, and he's willing. If you've seen a movie like Little Children, which is a great film, and he's terrific in, like he's not afraid to play an unappealing character or a flawed character like that, even though he's a leading man.
Absolutely, that you've got a. I think there's a. He's willing to, and he's delved into so many projects, and horror seems to have found him, and science fiction seems to have found you, and you kind of love that. What's something that this is something that's kind of, I think, prevalent across a lot of your features and a lot of your work, is the kind of mechanics or the objects in a small way, like you were talking about the mechanical doors in a cube. And there's something about science fiction and horror where something mechanical or something that you would see in Cypher or Peripheral that works in terms of production. So is it like a fascination with the design of science fiction that fascinates you and what you love? Like you look at design work behind Blade Runner and how those mechanics of the cars and the weaponry, is it something that you kind of love and have a passion for?
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, I love design, and of course, particularly design in science fiction. And concept artists like Sid Mead or Ron Cobb were deeply and remain deeply influential. A movie like Alien, which I feel is like maybe the best designed film of all time, was very, very important to me when that film came out. That had a huge impact, and not just because of the movie itself, but how Ridley Scott, brought those artists on and how he parsed them out to different parts of the design of the film. So, famously, H.R. Giger designed all of the alien world and technology and the alien itself, and of course his work was utterly alien. And then he had Ron Cobb, who actually had background in engineering and so on, designing all of the human side. And so the contrast of those two designers creates the tension of the movie, really. Like it is as important to the film as anything else in that film. And so yeah, I find that it's endlessly fascinating, and I love working with artists too. It's bringing interesting people, finding people. Like on In the Tall Grass, there's an amazing Japanese manga artist named Shintaro Kago, who we brought on to do some of the design work, who I feel is like one of the kind of the cutting edge of horror manga artists out there. He's kind of like, next gen Junji Ito. And,
right.
and I believe I'm the first person to have been able to use him in a film. I'm sure there'll be others who will. But that's really exciting, like finding somebody like that. So
it's now we're very close to Halloween, and it's kind of, you get this. For me, Halloween and horror and October is the month. December's whatever. It's when my dog was born. That's all kind of Christmas is for me, really. What do you have features or films? I know obviously with a busy schedule it's difficult to sometimes do that, but what do you kind of what do you lean towards watching kind of around the Halloween period? What are your kind of go-tos?
Oh, well, I really, of course, I love the Criterion app.
Criterion are amazing, yeah.
Yeah, so and they have all these, I think each year they kind of try to top themselves. They have all these horror programs that they put together. There's at least 3 of them this year. And sometimes there's some fairly obscure stuff, which I really enjoy discovering. I've made a pact with myself this year not to watch anything I've already seen. So
That's difficult.
It's so easy to like go back, like comfort
Yeah.
food to the things you know and love. But I've really been trying to expand my horizons, and also on Tubi. I don't know if you have Tubi in the UK, but there's just like a lot of really obscure stuff out there that's very interesting that I had never even heard of before. So I've been digging a little deeper into Italian giallo stuff, and I'm trying to think of like there's anything really crazy and interesting. I saw
There's
a very
there's an Italian. I think it's an Italian horror. It's I think it's called not Black Mask, but it's kind of like a Frankenstein story where a witch is burnt at the stake. It's like black and white. It's a beautiful film, and I'd never seen it. And the reason I discovered this film was my wife and I. And it's difficult. Like for me, I go straight to Fright Night. There's certain 80s films I kind of go straight to. And like you say, it's just like, it's like pasta or whatever. It's just pure comfort. And I think when you discover something new, and Cube had been rediscovered on our Alphabet Cinema. That's how we find something new. We alternate A's and then B, and with Halloween, I'll try to kind of go with your flow and stick with some new stuff, but it's very difficult. Maybe Talk to Me. Maybe Talk to Me can be one of yours.
I look forward to that. I must confess that, and this is probably a sign of my age more than anything, but I'm less excited by contemporary films. I think in the horror space that's not true. I think there's interesting stuff going on in the horror space, but when it comes to like mainstream Hollywood, there's not a lot out there that excites me. And then, as I say, I've been finding like some very unusual but quite good films. We have another streamer here called Shudder. I don't know if you get them in the UK.
Oh, I know Shudder. Yeah.
They have really interesting stuff. I saw a film with Liz Taylor, Elizabeth Taylor, called Identikit.
Okay.
Yeah, there's been a few.
I'm gonna make
ones.
note of that.
Try it out. Identikit.
I'm gonna make note of that. Yeah.
It's very. It predates David Lynch by 8 or 9 years, but it's very Lynchian. And what I'll say about it is, as you enter into it, you may think, well, is this like just random strangeness? But then it actually starts to all come together quite beautifully, and it's very skillfully made, beautifully shot. It's British director, but I think shot in Italy. And Elizabeth Taylor's off the hook. Strange. Anyway, but there are things like that excite me these days. In my old age, and when I discover something that is of that nature, I get really thrilled.
I think that I'm in a very similar way with certain huge, giant genres of features that I've lost interest in a lot of ways, and I know the way certain films are marketed, it's saturated, that my interest in those huge mega budget films has waned massively. Like, but it's it's difficult to find something original now. So when I go back, especially for this Alphabet Cinema thing I do with my wife, is I'm trying to get something that's older. I always try and find an older film, like even something the 30s or 40s. Rediscovering early Hitchcock, like Jamaica in, and trying to find something really kind of appealing that way, because I get a little bit despondent sometimes with what I tend to go for. I almost know this is going to work for me at the cinema, rather than going, do you know what? I'll go there. I'll watch a couple of films and see what's there. But like, what was that? What was the feature? Renfield with Nicolas Cage. It is a classic Nicolas Cage performance, and the makeup. I think you'll appreciate this with what you worked on before. His makeup, or how it changes throughout the film, is fantastic, because there's a mid stage where he's almost decimated as Dracula, but then halfway through he's like almost in coming back to being fully powered. But yeah, that was almost like a guaranteed goal when I go to the cinema now. It's difficult for me to kind of trust in how I'm being marketed to. And it's very difficult to find something original now, isn't it?
I think that's it. Like I like Megan, for instance. I thought that was really good.
Yeah.
And it was sort of what I miss in genre movies. It was an hour and a half. Did not overstay its welcome. It had a thread of sort of satire in it. I think there was some really smart stuff going on and skillfully made. And my hope is that in the grand scheme, what's happened is that Hollywood sort of created this paradigm. And I remember when it happened, I was there when they just realized like all we can really afford to do are tentpole movies because the marketing of films is so expensive. And I'm sorry, I'm going to go into a little bit of technical detail, but the ancillary markets like DVD died. So you had to bring people into the movie theater. That's the only way you really could make real money. And so they just, started to rely on big tentpole films that could only be viewed properly in a movie theater based on big IP. And now that paradigm, I think, is coming to an end. I think that the superhero thing, and I'm not denigrating superhero movies, but
no, absolutely,
we've had a steady diet of it for at least 15 years, and I think it's getting tiresome to an audience, and they're so expensive that they have to make absurd amounts of money just to break even. So I Hollywood is always at its best when it's failing, so therefore it starts to, because it's so risk averse, it just is forced to take risks. And I think with things like Megan or Cocaine Bear or these genre movies that are not too expensive, but that are catchy and that do draw people into a movie theater.
Yeah.
I think we may see more of those. And that's exciting to me because I love seeing movies in a movie theater. Like that's really my thing. And it's the only way really I feel to fully appreciate it. Film. So
I very briefly spoke to Chris McQuarrie about his audio work and post-production across Mission Impossibles and Way of the Gun, especially because there isn't anything like it. Sounds like a marketing thing, but there isn't really anything like being in the movie theater because unless you've got a state-of-the-art cinema at home, you truly don't get the experience. And especially with spatial awareness and sound design, because that's something that you can probably attest to, that a lot of people that don't have a supportive team around them when they make their own short films is they let the audio wane a bit because they're too, they think it's just about the visuals and what's on screen, and then the audio dips, and that's what I see because I've been I started a little film festival called the Hellbound Horror Festival, and I had Alex Proyas, the director of The Crow, as a judge, and Joe Alves, the production designer of Jaws, as a judge. And that's something that the only thing that really kind of let some of the short films down was the sound design. And when you go to see a theatrical experience of almost anything, it's 10 times better. And the greatest example of that is whether you like Avatar or not, it's never going to be the same experience as seeing it in the theater. And what was the last? But I've got a couple more questions before I let you go. What was the last kind of great theater experience for yourself in terms of how you felt walking out and you wanted to share your experience with other people? What was the last kind of great thing you saw in the cinema?
Well, in Toronto, we have some really great film societies. And I don't mean to be talking about old movies all the time. But we do have like very high level, or not high level, it's not the right word. We have like, really excellent presentations of old films at a number of repertory theaters here. So I think the last thing that made me feel like that was Jaws. It's just such a great movie. Yeah. And seeing it restored in all of its glory it made, it just sort of makes you feel like, well, it doesn't really get better than that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Sorry, myself.
I am,
but
that's okay.
yeah,
I spoke to one of the chaps that worked on the restoration of Jaws itself when they were getting the print of the film together, and he equated it to the Ark of the Covenant in terms of I have to get this right. My small part of getting the film reels together and finding the best prints, it's just like it's gospel to him. It was like finding new tablets for religion. That's how he saw it. And there's something about like when you watch a Criterion presentation, you trust in those companies to have done a good job, because there's nothing like. I'll give you an example, like watching Predator now on a Blu-ray. There's something that's done with the over sharpening, and they've introduced a different kind of noise, and then it's like, especially if you're a huge fan, Jaws is great, but there's a few technical things I won't want to go off on a tangent about. With they tweaked a few of the sound design elements in the film, and I wasn't a huge fan because it's my favorite movie. I love it to bits, but yeah, it's kind of precious to keep cinema going, because there's nothing quite like it. And but thank you, thank you so much for being part of the podcast. And I've got one last question for yourself.
Yeah.
Is what piece of advice would you give to filmmakers starting out that haven't got a group of people they can rely on work with? What kind of advice would you give them if you were in front of an audience of young filmmakers now?
Well, I mean, I think about this all the time because any issues that a young filmmaker has, I have. I think that the first thing to know is that we're all in the same boat. That even people who are much more successful than I am have the same problems. They scale differently, but they kind of come down to the same thing. And we're in a unique time right now. I don't really even know what the industry is going to be like after the strikes, which are just in the process of ending. I don't think it's going to be the same as it was before for a bunch of reasons. So, but I do know that it's different. And it's certainly different than when I came into this business, which was a time when independent film was very marketable and,
absolutely. 90s were massive for it, yeah.
It was very lucky that way. You could make a small film and it would get out there and you could actually sell it and it would have a big release. That doesn't really happen so much anymore. So I think on the distribution end of the spectrum, it is more difficult for young people. But on the production end, it's definitely easier because now you can make something on your own for very, very little money. And and that is exciting. And I think in a way that is the most important thing to do, is just to make stuff. And it doesn't have to be a feature film. It doesn't even have to be a film. But I think the main thing is to not wait for somebody to give you permission to make anything. And to just go out and do it. And, you have this and just do it with as clear a voice that is specifically your own as possible. The more it comes from something that is unique to you, the more interesting it's going to be to the rest of the world. And that really is, I think everybody says this, so I'm not saying anything unique. That is my advice, is just go out and make something that's uniquely you. And don't wait for somebody to allow you to do that. I mean, with my own little way, I made this comic book that I just decided to make a comic book. No one paid me to do it, but it didn't cost me anything. And I did it on this iPad, and now, it's published and it's out there. And I don't know that many people will read it, but in a way it doesn't matter. It's made and it's out in the world. And I think as creative people, we need to do that. The dangerous side of the film industry is that it forever dangles a carrot in front of you, and you're always chasing this thing, and it never actually happens. There's a very famous Dorothy Parker saying, which is, Hollywood kills you with encouragement. because it's always promising you something, and it rarely delivers. So you have to. I'm talking to myself as much as anybody else. You have to empower yourself to do things independently of the business and not worry about that. Just get it done, and then that kind of energy that comes from that process, I think, actually is more likely to take you somewhere than if you're just waiting for somebody to write that check for you to make your dream project. You're probably going to get further with a 3-minute really cool short film than you are with a big budget feature script that you can't convince anyone to invest in.
Absolutely. Well, Vincenzo, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you, and I'm sure Doug from the Sudbury Indie Creature Con is trying to get you involved in the future incarnation of the festival.
Oh yeah,
because I think people would really love to kind of have an audience with you, and I'm sure I'm not speaking for him. I don't represent him, but I'm sure he'll absolutely want that. But yeah, thank you so much, and it's been really fascinating talking to you. What I'll do is I'll send you a little email about when the episode gets released. I'm not sure if you're kind of officially on Instagram or anything.
I am.
Is that
yeah,
right?
I just started Instagram. I'm on Twitter as well, but I'll be sure to post it.
Because what I'll do is I'll send you a link to that Italian horror film that's kind of like Frankenstein. It's on Shudder.
Cool. Oh yeah. Please do.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
And
I love that.
there's Spiral on Shudder as well. Spiral, it's an original Shudder film. That's very good as well.
Is it?
Not the Saw film, but it's an original film called Spiral. That's great.
Oh, I will check. Thank you. I'll check that.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you.
Oh, you too, Alexander. Thank you so much for your time. This is lovely.
See you soon. Bye-bye.
Okay. Take care over there.